We have a really wonderful program for you today. Before we get started, I want to also tell everyone to make sure as we go through the program today to keep your cameras off and on mute. Our presenters are having a little bit of connectivity issues, so we want to make sure that we can secure as much bandwidth as possible. So before we get started, just make sure that we keep our cameras off. I also want to introduce the team here, the IEF team. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Julie Bates, and I'm the Donor Relations Manager. And we also have Sarah Conley with us, our Conservation Coordinator, and Deborah Olson, our Executive Director. So that's our IEF team. And now also, as we go through the program, if you have questions for our presenters, just put those in the chat and we will get to those. And hopefully at the end, maybe we'll have some time to take some direct questions. But in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Conley, and she is going to introduce our wonderful presenters.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited to have two incredible conservationists with us today. We have Dr. Priya Davidar and Dr. Jean-Philippe Puyravaud. I'm sure he can correct me in a minute, but Dr. Davidar served as professor and dean at Pondicherry University for 30 years and spent her career conducting ecological research in different regions of India, focusing on elephants, habitat connectivity, conservation, and landscape genetics. She grew up in India's southern Nilgiri mountains and was taught to love nature at an early age. She's authored numerous books as well as 100 papers in scientific journals, and her frequent collaborator is also her husband. Philippe, as he goes by, specializes in spatial ecology with a PhD in ecology from the Sorbonne and has held professional assignments around the world from the University of Sheffield in the UK to director of ValBio research station in Madagascar. He also has worked in renewable energies. Currently, Priya and Philippe live in the jungle of southern India in an elephant corridor that has the largest Asian elephant population in the wild. So we have some pretty exciting people here today who have really great perspectives to share with you. So we're very happy to have them. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right, so I am going to turn off my camera and share your slides, and then we can get going. Everyone, I apologize in advance if there's any sort of audio delay or things like that. We're having connectivity issues because, as you heard, they live in a kind of remote region, so please bear with us.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Okay. So this project on the conservation genetics of elephants started in 2012 when we received a grant from the International Elephant Foundation. So this project, which was new to us, led us into so many avenues, and we're still publishing from there. So we have several publications now, and we have research still ongoing on the same subject, which hopefully will lead to the better vision for the management of the Asian elephant. Next slide. I think I can do it. Oh, yes. So this is where we live. We live in the southwestern part of the Indian peninsula. And we live in the middle of a network of protected areas. This is on the left, down in the left corner. And this place is exactly where we live. This is our house, which has been a bit renovated since this picture was taken. And now this whole property has been made into a trust, the Sigu Nature Trust. And you can see the website there. So if you want to know what we are doing, this will give you a fair idea. So my father, who's on the right side corner, he created the trust because he was passionate about conserving elephants. And we live in an elephant corridor. He was one of the first people in India to study elephant connectivity. Next, please. Yes, so these are some of the elephants that roam around on our property. On the top left, you have this chubby little fellow, is called Enzo. And behind him, you have a large elephant who's called Socrates. I mean, we've known these elephants for more than a decade. Below that, there's a mother and her son. That's Renata and Chico. And on the top right is another mother and son. Both these sets of elephants are kind of solitary. So these are Bombi and Banta. These are our closest friends, actually. And below them is Ronaldo, who's one of the most dangerous elephants in this region. Sadly, he died some years ago, but he was quite aggressive and ferocious. And the middle of it all is another elephant called Rivaldo, who's one of the icons of the region. He's loved by everyone, and he knows it. So, yeah, next, please. We also have other animals living around us. This is a tigress who was around for a few years during the COVID times. Of course, we have many peacocks. Next, please. So before humans, the Asian elephant ranged widely from around Syria in the west to northern China in the east. And the Chinese population started reducing from about 7,000 years before present. And currently there's only one population in the south that's left. Whereas the Indian population declined much more slowly. It was only in the past 400 to 500 years that the elephants population in India started getting fragmented. Otherwise, they were found all over the subcontinent. And the figure on the right, you can see how the population of how the elephant populations, which are represented in brown, the areas which are inhabited by elephants, have become highly fragmented. So fragmentation is one of the causes of eventual extinction of species. So it is very important to address this issue right now. Next, please. So in India, we have 4 elephant populations. One is in the northwest, in the foothills of the Himalayas. The second is in the northeast, close to the Burma, Myanmar and places. And the third is in the eastern central range. And the fourth, the largest, is in southern India. You can see the Western Ghats indicating the elephant populations. And we did a research, again, with partial funding from IEF, with another institution, the Wildlife Institute of India, on the conservation genetics of the species. And what our results showed is that genetically these disparate populations are quite similar. So which indicates that not in the too distant past, they were connected. They were connected to each other. Next, please. And we studied the population in the eastern central region and in the southern region. With again, this was partially supported by the International Elephant Foundation funds. And we looked at the population genetics of these populations. There's one in the eastern central region and 2 in the southern region, which are sort of separated by a brief valley. And what we see from the genetics is that these populations are pretty close, and there's a lot of admixture. You see the different colors. The ones where there's overlap shows that there's a genetic admixture. That means the interbreeding, even now, despite these distances. And we also could detect several migrants across this region. And this also was published recently, and also IEF funds were involved in this project as well. Next, please. And so we developed this vision to connect the elephant habitats in Asia. We published a letter in Science, and we also developed a wide network of conservation and geneticists across the Asian region. who came together to share samples and all that. So this project is currently ongoing. Next, please. So I leave Jean-Philippe or Philippe to talk from now on. Thank you.
So thank you, Priya. Reconnecting elephant population is fairly difficult, as you can imagine. And in the place where we live, the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, the top map shows the reserve as it is officially depicted, but the small map on the upper left indicates that there is plenty of village perforation. Then the lower left, the map indicates the slopes, which are not too good for elephants because this is a heavy animal. And as you can see, the dark color indicates that there is plenty of slopes and mountains in our area that are not optimal. Then put on this the lower right map with disturbance in gray around villages and roads, and the whole thing together is a very difficult environment to circumnavigate for the elephants. Next. In order to do a plan to allow elephants to circulate, it's important to calculate corridors and core areas. Corridors are simply areas where elephants like to migrate, but this is a statistical idea. Of course, they don't follow exactly these corridors, but on the whole, the population tend to follow this path. And the core area is where elephants prefer to be, the best habitats we can imagine for these species. This has been done for the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. Next. Connectivity, what is it? Is actually trying to look at movement from the animal's perspective. This is not so easy to do. The slide is a bit too complicated, but the idea is that we have to have a location of elephants on the left side. This location or movement data. Then we look at variables. Try to see which variables are interesting. And these variables are actually satellite images or rasters, and they take into consideration, for example, elevation, land use, village boundary. And the last step is to try to make a resistance model from the correlation between genetic distance and landscape distance. The genetic distance is given to us by geneticists, and the landscape distance is calculated by different methods, including the least cost path. Next slide. So the method, if you imagine an image, you run an image that represents the landscape, and you run an algorithm that is intended to discover the least cost path on this image. As soon as the algorithm meets area of high resistance, it stops, like here, but it continues to calculate till it joins 2 points. And as we have seen earlier, we have elephant locations that are the many points that have to be joined. Here, that's it. The least cost path is calculated. This is the what we call the landscape distance. So we next. We've done a study, also partially with from the IEF, on the relationship between gene flow and slopes. The map indicates good gene flow in the blue areas and bad gene flow on red areas. Whatever is outside reserves is that are marked in black is a bit irrelevant because there are not so many elephants outside reserves. But what is interesting is to see that within the reserves, the area of red of high resistance to gene flow in red are actually mountains. And the discovery here is that most of the elephant reserves have been established on areas with steep slopes on mountains because they were the last habitat to be left once humans occupied the country. And this is all these habitats are actually suboptimal for elephants, except for a few habitats. So the way we try to resolve problems is to draw corridors or get an idea of the core areas as we saw earlier to see where it goes in the landscape. Like, for example, in the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve on the left side. And on the upper right side, you have an image of a cluster of villages where elephants are supposed to go through. But unfortunately, this cluster of village is a real obstacle for elephants. Not only do we have the villages and infrastructure, but we also have steep slopes. So the management part of it is to try to kind of keep the green arrows where we have still some habitat free of encumbrance. And this is actually a study that is going on to try to keep these little passages as free as possible. On the lower right side, it's a village called Tengu Marata that is in a valley, in the Moya Valley. When we look at its location on the left map, we can see that it seems to be really well situated in a large reserve that is gray and without any problem. But actually, when we look at Google image, we see that the village is located right in the Moya Valley, where elephants actually prefer to move. And therefore, this little village is actually a big hindrance to elephant movement. One way of trying to address the problem of connectivity is to slightly shift the village limits in such a way that elephant movement is kept going. Next. And this is the last slide. So we see all the challenges to maintain elephant connectivity within reserves. So it's even more challenging to establish long-term connectivity among now disconnected areas. So luckily, in between these reserves, we still have protected areas that are existing and eventually colonized by elephants. And there are areas where the landscape is heavily used by humans. The challenge of landscape ecology is to try to find corridors at the least cost for society and try to propose the idea of reconnecting these far distant areas and get the idea going, because right now the idea of reconnecting long-range population on the long range is not really a priority. So this is an idea that we are trying to propose, and let's hope that authorities will be interested, but future generations also will be interested. So that's it. We finish on this slide, and we thank you very much for your attention. We try to keep it short, and if you have any question, we would be happy to answer.
Thank you guys so much. That was very interesting. I know we have some people excited in the chat to ask some questions, but can you tell us, so you're really making a great case for connectivity and promoting elephant welfare in that way. What kind of meetings with the government are the local governments paying attention to your work? Have you been able to make headway in that?
Yeah, yes, surprisingly, we have, they have declared this entire region a long distance corridor, and our work helped to do that. We were our research work was kind of instrumental in persuading the courts,
That's excellent.
the Supreme Court, and declaring it an elephant corridor. So, yeah, in that way we have succeeded, and also we are now proposing short passages between villages where elephants can move instead of bumping into villages. They can go. So we are hopeful that they'll pick up on some of these ideas and declare it, declare them protected so that it is preserved for the future.
Right. So that's the next step, is declaring some of these regions protected areas.
Yeah, to have long, to keep them intact for the future, so that it doesn't develop into a building or something like that. And also they are also interested in buying private land. The thing is, here also private land is sacrosanct. They just can't come and take over for elephants. And so purchasing land is another option that we are all considering, including the government. So we do work fairly closely with them.
Great. It's good when scientific policy and the government level is actually informed by science. So do you think that it's actually possible to reconnect populations throughout India, even with, trains and roads and all of those things that kind of cross migratory pathways?
Well, this is very challenging, obviously. There are techniques today to design good corridors, like overpasses that are much better landscaped and inviting for the species to cross. Yes, I think these techniques are going to evolve, and for at least short corridors help to connect. For the long-range connectivity, this probably needs societal changes. People have to be convinced that we need ecosystems as part of the functioning of the society. And actually, systems are absolutely necessary to combat climate change. If we don't keep our ecosystems alive, there's no way we can regulate the temperature of the planet. And in India, the elephant is part of this ecosystem. This is the whole thing of the Paleolithic, or let's say fossil kind of ecosystem that we need to work to continue as a civilization. So our ideas are certainly challenging and most probably premature, but we have to risk this kind of ideas to I was just thinking that many of our ideas when we were young are now adopted, like, for example, in the agronomy and in agriculture, you have much more ecology taken into consideration.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
This kind of idea may be challenging, but hopefully will be picked up by scientists and young people, and let's hope we'll propagate.
Well, speaking of getting more people on board, maybe you can talk a little bit about farmers and like the human-elephant conflict that happens with local communities, because I know that sometimes is a big hurdle to establishing corridors and keeping elephants protected. So have you found good solutions to bring farmers on board, people who have dealt with a lot of conflict?
This is really difficult to talk about, because conflict, what is it? Looking at the data we have here, half of the deaths are people who come back home because they drank. They drank alcohol. And this is the reality. It's difficult to say and it's difficult to share, but half of the conflict are this. Then you take other conflicts like encroachments and illegal activities, and you can see that approximately 75 to 3/4 of the conflicts are due to negligence. So if you ask me for a solution to resolve 3/4 of the conflicts immediately, I would go into this direction of awareness. You don't go into protected area when you are drunk or when you don't have a light, flashlight, or and remove encroachments.
Makes sense. Like many things, education is a good solution, right?
Yeah, actually, we have one example, we are doing a plan for the management of this region. So in one village, you have elephants walking right through on the main road. So we went to do a survey there, and we found that there's a big river near this village, and we found that there are buildings on both sides. Usually elephants would go along the rivers, especially the herds. They don't like to come near human habitations. But since they blocked the river with their buildings, which are right on the river, these elephants have no choice. If they want to move from one forest to the other, they have to go through the town. So these are kind of instances are very local. Actually, these kind of problems are local, and from what we see, a lot of the problems are because of the location of agriculture and the location of settlements. So when an elephant moves through the landscape, it bumps into a sugarcane field. I mean, you can expect that he's going to stop there and have a good feed.
So now beyond the negligence part of it, of building anywhere and behaving, of course there are solutions like electric fences are a good solution, and also adapting crops and adapting agriculture to the presence of large animals. So if we put all this together and work seriously on it, yes, the incidence, the human-elephant conflict can be much lower than what it is. Plus, of course, elephants are animals that are highly sensitive and can be easily stressed. But if you behave in a certain way, if you have a body language that goes in sort of aggression, the elephant also answers to that, and this is quite dangerous. So yeah, I think there's potential to really reduce the human-elephant conflict relatively easily, actually.
Okay.
Paradoxically.
I'm getting some questions sent to me. Do you have any estimates of how many elephants live outside of protected areas? What are we talking about as far as elephant population?
Everywhere or just here?
Just in India, just in
India.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some elephants that live completely out of protected areas. For example, in plantations, all the forest has been cut down. So they basically have no place, nowhere else to go. But these elephants, I think, are a small proportion of the total number of elephants. Most of them live in protected areas, but they cross human-dominated areas to go to another protected areas. So they tend to traverse since they're very wide-ranging. So I would say strictly we know only about the south. We can say for sure that out of the 10,000 elephants that you find here, just maybe 500 or maybe even 1,000 live strictly outside protected areas, which I don't think it happens. I think about 500 maybe live strictly outside protected areas.
5%.
Yeah, 5% or so. But the rest live in protected areas, but they're always moving around. They travel long distances, so they can go up to 200 kilometers. So they're always moving through human-dominated areas.
They tend to explore. So they tend to get out of protected areas.
But I believe in the Northeast, a lot of them are just stuck in plantations because there's no forest left. That's what I heard.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Given that and the the limitation on habitat, would you say the elephant population in India is growing, increasing, or decreasing?
It's decreased. It has decreased by 20% since 2017. 20%. A huge number.
Is that because of habitat loss? Is that poaching for ivory and skin? Is it, what do you think the main drivers of that decreasing population are?
I think firstly, it's very difficult to carry out proper census. So, there's a margin of error that we need to consider. But I think mostly it's habitat loss because poaching is very rare here. They get electrocuted and run over by trains as well. But in this region, a lot of the habitat has been transformed into agriculture. So.
That makes sense. Maybe say a little bit more about the train problem that you mentioned, because I think maybe our audience isn't aware of that threat.
Yeah, we have railway lines traversing protected areas, railway lines, highways, everything. So, so the trouble is these trains go at a certain speed. They don't look around. They don't take care of what is on the tracks. And of course, the elephants panic when they see something large coming their way. So a lot of them get killed. But in some areas, it's because of habitat loss. For example, in one area, which is fairly close to here, these train collisions have been quite frequent. And what one expert was saying is that the railway line is right between a water source and a steep slope. So they have to cross the line to reach water. And now this government is mitigating all that. They have early warning systems. When there's an elephant on the track, then there's a system to send a message to the driver of the train to slow down. So apparently that has decreased these collisions in this region at least. I don't know about the rest of India. I think it's still quite high elsewhere.
So there are mines. There are a lot of minerals in central India. And so the mining industry right now is really going after these resources. And a lot of habitat has been lost in central India. Of course, it can change with the political inclination. But we also, cause of mortality is also the plant invasions, invasive plants in the protected areas that decreases the carrying capacity of the reserves. So yes, the population is likely to go down. And we have collaborated to a paper that has been cited in this study that shows that with climate change, the central India population is likely to suffer the most because it's low elevation, and when the temperature increases, there's barely any way to protect yourself to actually this level of temperature that are dangerous to humans as well.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I think that paints a good picture for our audience. So what do you think the likelihood is that India and the government will create more protected areas for elephants?
They have protected elephant reserves, but it's not been implemented. There's no legal implementation. They're trying to do that. But, conservation is more a state subject. So some states don't want any corridors, nothing. They don't want protection of any sort for wildlife because they have a mineral rich. So they have railway lines going everywhere. And some other states are more proactive. So
where we are in Tamil Nadu, the government wants to have 30% of its area restored, meaning under ecosystems. So this is huge because Tamil Nadu, it's a small surface, it's a small area, and there are 70 million people. It's 1/3 of the area of France. If you to give you an idea, and it's the same population.
Okay.
But we have several.
Go ahead.
We have a very good network of conservationists and very aggressive conservationists who keep fighting for all this all the time. So through the courts and all that. So that is a big plus.
And that's how change is going to be made, having dedicated conservationists like you guys who are working hard every day to make these things happen. I did get an interesting question. Priya, when you were starting out in the 70s, you were one of the few female field biologists. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience, how things have changed?
I think I was the only one, and from what I know, and my supervisor was extremely supportive. So he was very famous. But the others were extremely hostile. I mean, all the other colleagues and all that. But because of him, they couldn't do anything about me. I mean, and that's how I managed. But nowadays, it's much better. There's so many women in this field, so it's really improved vastly. But I think still there are a lot of challenges. I hear stories and all that are not very pleasant. In those days, in my days, there didn't seem to be this kind of sexual harassment problem. I think it was far more puritanical. So I didn't have to face the problems that the ladies now seem to be facing. So,
But
but it's extremely patriarchal.
I interrupt Priya because this is bad. She was brought up in a family where people were in the jungle, were going outside, and I don't think, of course, being a girl in India.
Since I grew up in the jungle, for me it was not a problem to do field work.
Being a girl in India, of course, could be limiting, especially in the 60s and 70s, but it was natural for Priya to be in the wild and to do ecology.
Yeah, that part was okay. And also the people in the rural areas are very friendly and helpful.
So she was the first professor of ecology in India, a woman.
That's incredible. Well, maybe you can tell us more about how you grew up, and you grew up around nature and immersed in it, and maybe how that upbringing influenced your perspectives and the path you took in academia.
Yeah, actually the path was a series of opportune moments, because I really didn't know what I was going to do next. But I grew up in the jungle. My father was a sort of a natural. He's a lawyer, but he was a naturalist, and he became a very staunch conservationist. So I grew up with that, and he also let me do whatever I wanted, which was nice. My mother was also a physician, a doctor, so I was family. We were used to women working women, so to speak. So they were not particularly conservative. But then I faced a lot of challenges from society at large. In India, caste and this and that, it's a huge problem when you are working. So.
But again, I remember Priya saying that when she went to the US, some people, like she was a student of E.O. Wilson.
No, yeah, I was not a student. I was working as
and people like that who helped tremendously.
Yeah. In the United States, I had a lot of extremely good mentors, like E.O. Wilson and all these people were very good. I think my career was boosted because I was there for about 7.5 years. I think certainly my training and everything was really boosted because of that experience there. And also I became much more assertive and aggressive, which much to the dismay of my colleagues here, but because I think here they expect women to be very demure, but so
it's
the
amazing.
American experience was fantastic. Yeah.
I was going to say it's amazing the power of a good mentor, knowing that you have someone to back you up. So,
Yes.
Philippe, how did you get involved in conservation? We don't know much about your backstory.
Well, you know, it's almost impossible to retrace the causes. My uncle was a Pondicherryan, and when I was a child, 6 or 7, he offered me a book on the fauna of Africa, and I opened that and I said, I want to see that. Especially this book was mentioning that the lions was about to disappear, and I said, no, I need to do something. And I was brought up in a suburb, a working class suburb of Paris, and nothing in the world was, I mean, I could never have imagined that I would end up in an elephant corridor, sometimes seeing more elephants in one day than people in India. So it's really changed, and I was always convinced that, you know, I am an admirer of nature. I always have been an admirer of nature, interested in processes, and well, this is how I became convinced that conservation was my way of life.
Wonderful. So you guys maybe talk more about living in an elephant corridor. I think most of our audience is, you know, in the West, in the United States. So, you know, the biggest animal that they encounter may be a deer. So maybe talk about the ins and outs of living where an elephant or a tiger might show up in your front yard.
Yes, it's a huge challenge, but you have to be very, very watchful all the time, very alert, because you can bump into anything. And elephants are around the house. In fact, you know, they break into the kitchen now and then. And so they come very close. And many of them are quite friendly. And the only elephants that have attacked us are the ones we don't know, that come from somewhere else. But our local elephants, I think they know us well, and they kind of haven't done anything so far. But it's a very dangerous place. We don't allow children here below 14, because children, you know, they like to run around and play and all that. And there are bears also. One bear used to come and sleep in our veranda. So there are bears around, and but the tigers and leopards have never been problematic. They are very, very shy. So,
I don't know if you had the opportunity to look at this video, Maximus.
Absolutely, we can do that.
The link, and you can see that elephants are not very far from us, and as long as you don't frighten them or surprise them, they're fairly calm. But I would think that the most surprising here are the human beings. Oh, you are running it? It's 8 minutes, if I remember well.
Well, you guys can talk over it. We'll play it in the background. Does that make sense?
yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
So the surprising things are the human beings. I mean, when you work in a lab and you work on ecology or conservation from a lab, 500 kilometers from the area, you can't understand all the intricacies of conservation. I'll give you an example. People harvest wood. You don't want people to harvest wood. So what do? You give a free gas cylinder for them to cook. And what you know next is that they rent their gas cylinders to resorts and hotels and to make money, but still keep on harvesting from the forest. So if you work on forest productivity and try to find ways of reducing harvesting. And you are not in the field, you entirely miss the big picture.
That makes perfect
Well,
sense.
it's interesting to live in an elephant corridor. We are surrounded by villages, obviously, to know about people's strategy to cope with everything, with poverty in particular, because people who surround us are quite poor. They are tribals, often not very educated, and they try to make a living with whatever they find in the jungle.
So practically, I bet you guys have to treat your trash differently, protect your trash so you don't attract wildlife, store your food sources a little differently. Can you tell us more about that? The different ways that you live to not make an impact and not draw attention from the wildlife?
Well, one thing that's obvious is the plastics. We generate cages of plastics, even though we are just a middle class house, and we don't have a resort. So, and one way to deal with it is to clean the plastics. It's very easy to do. And once you're used to it, segregate the plastic, dry it, put it in a bag, and every 3 months, carry to a center in Uti, 30 kilometers away, in such a way that this plastic can be recycled. Then glass, when we break a glass, it's recycled again in Uti. We give that to a shop. Papers can be burnt. And as far as the organic waste is concerned, what we do is that we have visitors along the day, like a sort of deer, a spotted deer. And so we prepare our waste for the spotted deer. They eat everything. They are not as annoying as the monkeys, not as dangerous as elephants, and not as dirty as the pigs. So we have to know the timing of visit of the spotted deer and give them the rest of for recycling. So everything, the worst is the medicine, because it's usually a mixture of plastics and aluminum. In this case, we have to keep it and put it in the village dump. But that represents maybe at the most 1 kilo every 3 months. Apart from that, all our waste are recycled. So we generate 1 kilo of 1 kilogram of waste that cannot be recycled.
That's incredible. You're living as sustainably as possible, and that's incredible. I'm sure our audience is eager to know what they can do. How can they help support healthy habitats in India? What kind of things can they do to support your work and elephants and in general?
It's a tough question. I don't know. We never thought about it. I'll tell you why. We live in a country that doesn't that prevent help to come to India from abroad. So the answer is very simple. Your help is by what you do in the States.
That makes sense. There's definitely things locally that people can do to be more sustainable and protect habitat and also support great work like yours. So good to know.
Yeah, we haven't really thought about it. But,
no, but this is a fairly complex thing. Is that, of course, there are plenty of things to do in our region, like, for example, restoring elephant habitats, removing invasive species. We would even need to know better the elephant habitat just with remote sensing techniques and sample the area. But Right now, we just can't do that. We can't
Maybe
get money from abroad.
Purchase private properties.
Yeah, even purchase private property, we could do that. But
But the forest department can get money.
right now,
We can't personally get money, but
if
the Forest Service can certainly.
through the Forest Service, yes, it's an idea.
If they want to buy some private land for corridors or something, I think because they are looking for money to purchase private properties. So that's one way in which can make a big difference. I mean, we can talk to them about it. But,
No, that's great. I think that's a good way to wrap this up. You guys really gave people a lot to think about. And I know that everyone really enjoyed what you were talking about because I know I enjoyed it. And I speak for
Thank you.
IEF that we are proud to support great work, and I can't believe all the publications that you got out of just one study or one, study
Yeah,
period. So that's incredible.
we usually work with little. Yes.
yeah, we are used to working with a very
Yes.
frugal.
We are very frugal.
But I think that one project really set off a whole chain of events that have now spread widely. And
We were helped with the fish and wildlife.
yeah,
This project. We had a big grant from a big that was $100,000.
something like that.
Yeah, with the fish
But
and
the
wildlife.
thing is, you helped us when we didn't have any money, and you didn't know us from Adam, so that
was really nice.
that was very nice.
Great boost.
To the
Well,
great.
we are happy to do so, and we are always thrilled to see how efficiently spending money can go so far. I think people here, we in the United States, we live in the land where a Starbucks might be $7, and people don't realize how far their dollar can go with you or with other projects around the world, because it really goes so much further and you can get so much more bang for your buck. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over. Go ahead.
Thanks for the opportunity to present our kind of work and all that.
Thanks to listen to us, everybody.
Thank you all, and particularly Sarah and Deborah.
I'm
All
glad
right.
that our internet worked
Yeah.
finally.
It's a miracle.
So stressed, yeah.
Just in time. It was everything was meant to be. I'm going to turn it over to Julie to wrap up, and yeah.
Well, thank you so
Okay.
much for this wonderful presentation. And I'd like to invite everybody to turn their cameras on and give our presenters a wonderful round of applause.